Most people don't know this, but banks, credit card companies, payday lenders, some forms of student debt, not federal student debt, but some forms of private student debt, even hospital bills, get sold on a shadowy secondary market of debt buyers and debt collectors. And here's the catch. This is what makes it all possible and doable. When this debt is sold to investors, it is sold for pennies on face value. So, for example, let's say that you are one of millions of Americans who have revolving credit card debt. You are forced to take out debt to meet your basic needs. We know that 42% of all credit card debt goes to pay for things like utility bills, rent, hospital bills, student debt. People are paying their student debt with their credit cards because they don't have the money. When people lose their job, the bills don't stop when you lose your job. You have to, we have cut our safety net in this country, and the only safety net that is left is made out of plastic. So people in the short term, while they're looking for a new job, rack up massive amounts of credit card debt. And then when they get their new job, they start making minimum payments, payments that don't cover the full outstanding principal, and the interest piles on. And the credit card companies love revolving credit. That's where they make their money. Within the credit card industry, they refer to people who pay off their balance every month as deadbeats. They're using a credit card without paying any interest. Now, the credit card companies still make a servicing fee every time you swipe your card. A portion of that purchase goes to MasterCard or Visa, but they're not making money off of the interest if you pay your balance. They really target people who they think are going to struggle to pay off this debt, but pay it at a trickle. They really target students. I don't know, those of you who are students, I don't know if you're getting flooded with invites for new credit cards. So you are paying your revolving credit, and you pay it for as long as you can, and then you just don't have any more money and you can't pay it anymore. Well, the credit card companies already made a lot of profit off of you. They're okay with that. After 180 days after your last payment, the credit card company gets a tiny bailout from the taxpayers. They write that debt off as a loss. Even though they've already made a profit off that debt, they write the outstanding balance off as a loss. When they do that, they get a tax break. This is one of the reasons, it's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons why many of the major banks have not paid taxes in recent years, or the taxes they've paid are significantly lower than the rates that you and I pay taxes. They are actually forced by the government to sell off that debt. Now this is something that the banks are really happy about. It allows them to get bad debt off of their balance sheet. It makes their balance sheet look much more healthy. And here's the other catch. They sell it to investors, just people who buy and sell a little bit of your misery in order to make massive amounts of profit. And they sell it for pennies of face value. On average, when you average all of the debt that's being sold on the secondary market for things like auto loans, consumer loans, credit card, payday loans, lots and lots of payday loans, private tuition debt, the average going rate is 4 cents on the dollar. But depending on what kind of debt, how old it is, how close it is to the statute of limitations, a whole host of factors, you can buy some debt for significantly less. Now, the other catch is that the credit card company that generated that debt lends money to the investors to buy the debt from the credit card company. So when those investors go out and hire third-party debt collectors to hound you for the full amount, They pay off the debt to the credit card company. Does that make sense? It's an incestuous mess. So even when the bank sells the debt, they're still making profit off of it as the debt collectors go after you. It's a scam, and it's an extremely profitable scam. These debt buyers are not regulated. There's very, very little regulation. That's starting to change thanks to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. But for the last decade, it's basically been the Wild West. They do anything they want. Nobody is looking at what they do. And they violate your rights in a million ways and just get away with it. For example, it is not uncommon for a debt buyer to just, after a phone call with a complete stranger, send off a spreadsheet with your information and thousands of other people's information and your social security number attached. It's the process, the potential for abuse, for identity theft is extremely high. Now, they're not supposed to do that, but a lot of them do that. Another example of just, there's no honor among thieves. A debt buyer might buy a whole chunk of debt, millions of dollars worth of debt, and credit card debt from a credit card company. They might then slice that portfolio up into lots of smaller portfolios, and they might take a single account and sell it to 5 different people, telling each one of them, you're the only one who owns this debt. And then those 5 different debt buyers each hire 5 different debt collection companies, and those 5 different debt collection companies are all calling you about the same debt. You might pay it off to the first one, and the second one will keep calling you, and you'll say, I already paid it. And that second company will say, according to our records, you've never paid a penny of it. And we're going to report this to the credit reporting agencies. It becomes extremely difficult to file all of the paperwork with the credit reporting agencies to fix their errors. The vast, I don't even know what that is. The vast majority of the credit reporting agencies have mistakes on the vast majority of our accounts. If you spend the time to request your credit report from the 3 major credit reporting agencies and look over it meticulously, you might find debts that aren't your own on your credit report. Somebody who has the same name as you or a similar name. They'll just describe that debt to you, and it will affect your credit, affect the interest rate that you would pay, for example, if you take out an auto loan, affect your ability to get a job. This is one really important legislative change that I would encourage everyone to fight for. Currently, when you apply for a job, many employers do a credit check. This has become an alibi for racial discrimination in hiring. We have set up a system where it is perfectly legal to discriminate against someone on the basis of their credit score in the ways that previously people were discriminated against for the color of their skin. We've also set up an economic system where if you look at the breakdown, and I'm sorry I don't know the statistics off the top of my head, but it is in our manual, people of color have dramatically lower credit ratings than people who have light skin and blue eyes like myself. It's a horrible system. There's absolutely no correlation between your credit score and how responsible you are as a citizen. No correlation between your credit score and how good of an employee you will make. Yet your ability to get housing and your ability to get a job is linked to your credit score. This should be changed, and in various locations there are efforts to make that happen. In New York State, for example, I'm not sure what the situation is in Illinois, but that might be something worth rallying around here. There was a study done by a fantastic organization called the New Economy Project, located in New York City. These people are my heroes. They have been going after the debt buying industry harder and better than anyone else. They did a study where they looked at only the 22 largest debt buyers in New York City, only for a span of 2 years, and they found that over that period of time, those 22 companies extracted $1.1 billion of wealth from the poorest citizens in New York City. Nearly all of them lower-income families, predominantly families of color. This debt-buying system is a way for investors to literally get rich by keeping other people poor and in debt. So what we thought we could do, since you can buy this debt for pennies on the dollar, is that we would try to raise some money. And I thought, boy, maybe I could raise $5,000. If I raised $5,000, that would be enough to purchase and abolish $100,000 worth of debt. I just thought, $100,000 is a lot of money. That was the scale of my imagination when I was first working on this. When StrikeDebt formed and StrikeDebt officially took on the project, everyone else was more ambitious. They said, oh, I think we can raise $50,000. Then we can abolish $1 million worth of debt, and $1 million is a lot of money. That'll get people excited. So on November 15th, 2012, exactly 1 year after the eviction from Zuccotti, we held what we called the People's Bailout. It was an amazing cultural event with rock stars and comedians and magic performances and speed lectures about how debt works. And we were completely blown away by, the project really struck a chord. I think one of the lessons that we learned is that people are ready to find creative ways to resist debt. To date, we have raised a little more than $700,000. Now, we're not raising any more money. This is a temporary tactic. It doesn't actually solve the problem. It highlights how debt works. It shines a spotlight on the debt buying industry. It provides mutual aid for a relatively small number of people. We want to move beyond it. We call it the Rolling Jubilee because it's supposed to roll into larger tactics. To date, we have spent $400,000 of that money that we've raised and abolished just under $15 million worth of medical debt. So at the moment, we are currently researching new portfolios. We want to get other kinds of debt beyond medical debt. We want to get student debt in some form. Maybe a month and a half ago or so, I got the vice president of Sallie Mae on the phone, a guy named Doug St. Peters. He is in charge of packaging Sallie Mae's loans and selling them to investors in various forms. The federal student loans that Sallie Mae services, if these loans originated prior to 2009, even though they were federal student loans that went through the FAFSA system, these loans were being originated at private banks. My student loans were originated at Citibank and Deutsche Bank, and they have been packaged into student loan asset-backed securities, very similar to the mortgage-backed securities that brought down the global economy. My loans have been culled and combined with the loans of 50,000 other students, and right now there are Wall Street investors who are placing bets as to how quickly we will be able to pay this off. Because I had the audacity to try to get an education, people on Wall Street will be making a profit. That just boils my blood. I I thought I was borrowing money from the government and paying it back to the government. Little did I know how many people were making money off of my education. Since 2009, the legislation has changed, and now the Department of Education is making direct loans to new students through the FAFSA program. All of the profit that used to be going to private bankers is now going to the Department of Education. If the Department of Education was a corporation, they would be the most profitable corporation on the planet. According to the Congressional Budget Office, they made more profit in 2012, 5 times more profit than Google, more profit than Apple, more profit even than ExxonMobil, the most profitable private corporation. All by you going to school. So I talked to the Vice President of Sallie Mae, who most of his job is managing these investment portfolios. Part of his job, though, is looking at the private student loans that Sallie Mae makes and deciding to sell some of those accounts to debt buyers. And when they do that, he said that they sell them from anywhere between 11 cents to 20 cents on the dollar. I was trying to sweet talk him into selling some of that debt to the Rolling Jubilee. The first conversation I had with him, I thought I was making headway. A couple days later, he sent a one-word email saying, we're not going to sell you any debt. I tried to get him on the phone again, and eventually I did. It was like talking to a politician caught in a sex scandal. Every question I was asking, no matter how I would word it, no matter how polite I was, the response was, I'm just not going to answer that question. And when he finally asked, can you at least tell me why you're not going to answer any questions? He just said, well, I'm not going to answer that question. And so I can only assume that he looked into who we were and what we were doing, and concluded correctly that we are his mortal enemy. In the spirit of loving your enemies, I thought it's worth trying. But Sallie Mae is just the biggest fish in the sea. There are lots and lots of for-profit universities that make loans at exorbitant rates to their students. These for-profit universities are scam schools that particularly target lower-income students, students of color, get them worthless degrees, load them up with debt, make out like bandits, massive amounts of profit. Some of the entire system, and when we talk about the 1%, we're not just talking about private corporations, we're talking about the way in which the state has been captured by the 1%, the way in which the laws are written by the 1%. For-profit universities have one of the most powerful lobbies in Congress. They lobby Congress to cut funding for community colleges in order to create an artificial market for for-profit universities. The main competitors for for-profit universities like DeVry University, Corinthian College, Everest College, the University of Phoenix, at this point there are hundreds of these schools. The main competitors for them are community colleges, which offer quality education at low cost. They need to gut those community colleges in order to get access to those students. They've successfully done that. We spend billions of dollars on Pell Grants, taxpayer money, that is just being shuffled off to Wall Street investors at for-profit universities. They specifically target soldiers returning from Iraq and Afghanistan and gobble up the largest share of the GI Bill. If we put a stop to that and directly finance higher education, it's extremely affordable to do that. I won't talk more about this because I talked a lot about it last night, but based on StrikeNet's calculations, it would take roughly $12.4 billion to make every university, public 2-year community college, completely free for all students. $12.4 billion sounds like a lot of money until you look at it on the scale of the federal budget. It is a rounding error on the federal budget. We spend $15 billion every year fighting the war on drugs. The Pentagon did an audit of themselves and concluded that they waste $70 billion every year. It's extremely affordable to do. We just need to craft the policy to show the brass tacks, common sense way of funding it. Bob Samuels at UCLA has done that work for us in his new book, Why Public Higher Education Should Be Free. I think once we get a concrete policy to rally around, it's simply a matter of taking direct action to force it to happen. And this is really where the Rolling Jubilee is headed. What does phase 2 look like? Here is the one graph. I'm limiting myself to one chart and graph for this talk. And here it is. Isn't it a thing of beauty? If you get this one concept, you get why debt is such an attractive site of resistance for us. That red line is worker productivity. How much value, how much wealth are we creating as workers when we work? As you can see, since World War II, it's been a steady climb every year. We're producing more and more wealth. How much of that wealth are workers actually taking home in their wages? Well, it's always been split between the workers and the owners and the investors, right? The investors have always been siphoning off surplus value for themselves, getting rich without working. But up until the late 70s, early 80s, workers were, like that old saying goes, the slices of the pie were not getting bigger or smaller, but the entire pie was getting bigger. So as workers were producing more wealth, they saw a bigger paycheck. That all changed around the 1980s. I'll let you remember all of the changes that happened around the 1980s. Since that time, when you account for inflation, the real wages that workers have been making has been flat. Even though we're working harder and producing more wealth, we are making about what we made in 1980. Where has all of that wealth gone? It's all gone to the 1%. The 1% piece of the pie has been getting dramatically bigger. Now, our real wages have been flat, but the cost of living has not been flat. This is why we're in debt. We're not in debt because all of us somehow are fiscally irresponsible, because none of us know how to balance a checkbook. We're actually, the vast majority of us are quite responsible with our own money, thank you very much. It's not that we are living beyond our means, it's that we have been denied the means by which to live. The cost of education has skyrocketed. 1,000% increase since my birth. The cost of healthcare has increased dramatically. The cost of housing has increased dramatically. Our ability to pay for those things has flatlined. This is why we are in debt. Labor has been decimated over the last 30 years. I think a debtors movement is what a labor's movement looks like under the present circumstances. What would it look like to create something like a debtors union? This is what I would think phase 2 of the Rolling Jubilee is. The Rolling Jubilee doesn't solve the problem, but it is a spark. It is a spark, and when you follow the fuse, it is, I love, there's a reporter in England who, at our last announcement, when we announced all of the medical debt that we abolished, he said, the Rolling Jubilee is the sparkling lit fuse of debt refusal. If you follow that sparkling lit fuse, it goes to a powder keg of just outright non-cooperation with debt. Debt is the way that Wall Street occupies our lives, and non-cooperation is the way we evict Wall Street. It doesn't work to do it as an individual. If you default on your loans as an individual, the system crushes you. If we work together, if we get, it's purely a numbers game. If we get a large enough number of us together to refuse our debts, we really can shift power away from Wall Street. We can retake our government. We can create a democracy. In my opinion, we don't currently live in a democracy, but if we practice democracy ourselves, we can create it. Our big argument, the big argument StrikeNet is making, is which debts do we really owe and which debts don't we owe? Which debts are just and should be paid and which debts should be refused? I would submit to you that we as a society, we as workers, are producing massive amounts of wealth. We have all of the money to meet our true moral obligations to each other. If you get sick or injured, we have the wealth to provide health care for every single person. If we switched to a healthcare system like the one that Canada has, it would save us collectively $400 billion every single year. Think of all that we could do with $400 billion. Think of how much affordable housing we could provide with that money. We have the resources to provide our true obligations, but only if we refuse to pay our false obligations to Wall Street. So StrikeNet's main approach, following the classic tactics of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King, if we identify the ways we cooperate and simply refuse to cooperate, and pair that with new social bonds with one another, with new forms of cooperation with one another, we can meet all of our true debts. So what would that actually look like? Well, how do you actually organize debtors? Since we're all strangers, it's not like we all have the same factory. I want to show you something that I want to build. We've been thinking about this for years. We want to actively build it. There are all of these new websites that are designed to help you pay your debt off faster. They're really aimed for the upper middle class, people who actually have money left over every month to pay off their debt. Here's one of them. It's called ReadyForZero.com. I'm not showing you this as an advertisement for them. I'm just showing you this so that you can sort of get the concept of how this would work. You create an account with them. I've created an account here. And it logs me out every few minutes. And you just tell it what debts you have. So, let's see. Here is its optimistic projection at how long it's going to take me to pay off my student debt. Note that when I try to type in what I can afford to pay, where do I do that? I do... I'm sorry, I have to relook at how I do it. I said I can pay maybe $600 a month. It said, no, if you do that, you'll never get out of debt. We recommend you pay at least $1,500 every month. And I'm like, well, okay, I can see that this tool is not designed for someone like me. But it's really simple. Let's say I've got a credit card bill. I click to add that credit card bill. Let's say I've got, I can type in any kind of credit card. Maybe I have something with Chase. Here, I've got my Chase credit card. And if you have a credit card with Chase, you can go to Chase's website and type in your login information, and you can see your debt. Well, that's what it asks you to do here. You type in your Chase user ID and your password, and ReadyForZero does what's called data scraping. They just go and capture that information off of Chase's website, and they aggregate it. So you can see all of your debt in one place. It's kind of handy. But what we're interested in doing is building something that's capable of doing the same thing so that we can aggregate everyone who has debt with Chase. And then when we crunch the numbers, and there are all kinds of data scientists at MIT who we've been talking to who are really eager to help us do this. When we crunch the numbers, we can say, okay, we now have enough people that if we all refuse to cooperate with Chase, we can basically bankrupt Chase and pay this money to ourselves, pay it to our real needs. An example of this, there's a group in Cleveland, Ohio that was organizing people who have underwater mortgages, who instead of making their payments to the bank, made payments into an escrow account. So they weren't, they were responsible. They were paying, they understood that they should pay for their home, but they should pay a fair price for their home. They should pay what their home is actually worth. They shouldn't pay a mortgage that is worth 150% of the real value of their home. So the idea was they'll pay it into an escrow account, and they'll use that as leverage to negotiate a principal reduction with their bank. Right? That's entirely possible. It's simply a matter of getting enough people together to do it. There are other tactics that we have in development, and I'm looking at the time. And I think I'd rather just open it up so that we can talk to each other. How do you think we could go about building something like a debtors union? What are the problems? What are the possibilities? What other ideas do some of you have about how we could resist that? And we've got a microphone going around.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. One thing, just heads up, we can't make donations on your site right now. So heads up on that. One of the things I think about is the amount of investment it takes to house somebody versus the amount of return on the investment of getting it. So strategically, I think about, and this may part of the around, informing people of like, how long will it probably take to do ignoring phone calls until it's not worth the harasser's time to be pursuing anymore. I don't know what that ratio is. I'm wondering if you know anything about that.
Sure. Yeah, so I should clarify, the reason you can't make a donation on the Rolling Jubilee website is that we've decided we're not going to...
No, Strike Debt.
Oh, Strike Debt's website. Yeah. Okay, I will let them know. The issue there might be that we were using WePay, and WePay has changed. I'm not fully aware of what all those changes are, so we might have to update that. I don't know the answer to your question. I would recommend that you look at there's a chapter on mortgages and a chapter on debt collectors. In general, it's not a good idea to ignore phone calls or letters from a debt collector. Instead, what we're encouraging people to do is to dispute the debt. Oh, this is important. I didn't mention this. Debt buyers cannot prove in a court of law that they rightfully own your debt. Oh, this is a huge scandal. When I said that the 22 largest debt buyers extracted $1.1 billion of wealth from the poorest people in New York City, the way they did that is by systematically violating the constitutional right to a fair trial. They buy all of this debt, and there's no paper trail, there's no chain of title, or the chain of title they have is forged or fake or incomplete. They go seek a judgment in court, in a New York court, against these debtors, and they don't properly serve them papers. They use servicing companies that deliberately, they'll forge the paperwork and then throw the subpoena in the trash. They're known in the industry as sewer service. Like sewage, but like when there's a lawsuit against you, the subpoena ends up in the sewage. So the debtors don't know that they're being sued by a debt buyer, so they don't show up to court. And when they don't show up to court, the judge doesn't review the facts of the case. They just say, one party is here, the other party isn't. I will make a default judgment on behalf of the debt buyer. And then the state becomes the debt collector. The state starts garnishing your wages up to 15%. So the first time that a debtor knows that they've been sued is when their employer says, oh, your paycheck is going to shrink starting next month. That is a violation of their right to due process and a fair trial. Even worse, in the cases when people do challenge those debts, when they dispute those debts and say, prove it, prove that you own that debt. Debt buyers cannot prove it in 94.5% of all cases. So if you are being pursued by a debt collector, I highly recommend you check out the chapter on it in our manual. But one of the things that you can do is demand that all future correspondence be done in writing. That will stop the phone calls, and it will provide a paper trail. Debt collectors will often lie and say that they are going to send the police, which they can't do. They will say that they can put you in jail, which is illegal, although it happens. Debtors' prisons are back in this country. This is one of the things we're hoping to address with some of our next purchases with the Rolling Jubilee. We're not sure if we're going to be able to do that or not, but we're working really, really hard to abolish debt that will actually keep people out of jail. Another question up there.
I had to step out for a moment, so maybe you did cover this, but there's an international dimension to this buying of debt, and I understand that Pope Francis has actually condemned the policy of these false funds going after particularly Argentine debt. But you don't hear that in the reporting here, and I know you seem to have something to say on that, so I appreciate it, because there is that international dimension.
Exactly. I'm glad you brought that up. What we're able to do, we're able to work on the small scale of personal household debt. But the same thing is happening on Wall Street with sovereign debt. So Argentina defaulted on their debt in 2002, which was a good thing to do. They couldn't afford to pay their debt. If they paid their debt, people would literally die. So they defaulted on their debt, and they settled with their creditors. I think in most cases they settled for like 50%, I could be wrong on the exact percentage. And most of the creditors took that settlement. There is a hedge fund manager in the United States named Paul Singer who said, no, we want 100%. We want literally people to die in Argentina so that our hedge fund can make money. And he took Argentina to court in New York City. Why a New York judge can make a decision that affects every single person in Argentina, how can we call that a democracy? This is one of the members of Strike that has recently published this book, Creditocracy and the Case for Debt Refusal, arguing that that's not a democracy. What we have is a government by the creditor class. So this New York judge decided in favor of Paul Singer, and they're now repossessing battleships from the Navy, of all things. But here's the other factor. Paul Singer runs a super PAC who was the largest funder of Mitt Romney's campaign. So all of this money that is literally being taken out of the hands of people in Argentina, the reason why social services are being cut in Argentina, the reason why people are dying because they don't have access to health care, is all going to make the investors Paul Singer's work for wealthy in order to buy our legislators and write our laws. This is why debt is such a potential, why we see so much potential in debt as a site of resistance, in a similar way to the workplace as a site of resistance. The debt movement is the workers' movement, which is the debt movement. Question up front?
Thank you. I want to make sure I understand something from the first few minutes of your lecture. Did you say a debt buyer might pay 4 cents on the dollar to buy some debt, and then will come back to the debtor demanding 100%?
That's right. They will claim the legal right to collect 100% from you. Now, one of the common strategies that they'll take is say, that, they might start by asking for the full amount and put you on a payment plan. But if the person on the other end of the phone says, oh, I really can't pay, the debt collector will be authorized to settle for a lower amount. So the debtor thinks they're getting a deal if they only have to pay 50% of the principal. But in reality, what they don't know is that debt collector bought the debt for 4% of the principal. So if the debt collector is collecting 50% on each account that they've purchased, they are making out with, think about the return on investment there.
It's more than 100% return.
Yeah, I can't do the math that quick, but it's like 1,000% return. Now, the way the debt buying industry works, the way their business plan works, is they will buy a portfolio, and they'll place it with a third-party collection agency, and they'll say, keep making phone calls until we make X amount of profit. And as soon as they make X amount of profit, they stop. They sell what's left over of that portfolio downstream to another investor, and they buy fresh debt and start again. So they don't need to collect from every single person, and they don't need to collect 100% from the accounts they collect on. But the debt buying industry is just massively profitable. And again, these are investors who are literally getting rich, keeping other people poor and in debt. And one of the questions, I think the real usefulness of the Rolling Jubilee is that it punches holes in this idea that it's moral to pay your debt. What moral obligation do you have to pay an investor who purchased your debt 4%? What moral obligation do you have to pay them 100%? Our argument is if it's a debt that you are forced to take on for basic needs, that debt itself is immoral. That's the real crime. And the solution, the ultimate solution, is to fight for higher wages for everybody. If we had higher wages, we would just be able to meet our basic needs ourselves without being forced into debt to begin with.
Your last sentence there made really good sense to me. That graph I've seen many times before. I'm just as concerned as you are about this widening inequality and that spread. Those who have invested in higher education, some of them students in the room here, will do much better. I mean, the grade has gone up 49%. It's not just the top 1%. It's largely the top 1%, you're right. But all those with college education are going up, and those with high school are not. But what would you say, and this is where the point of my question, to somebody who would say, well, if you don't pay your debt, then what happens is nobody's willing to lend to you. So, when you get really, really, really desperate, and you might find somebody who'll lend at, 60%, some exorbitant rate, but nobody will lend to a person who doesn't pay their debts. What would you say to that? The flip side of the coin is, why not use political action? A very low percentage of students in the student precincts here didn't vote in the last election. And so they would feel lost by a very slim margin because the students at the University of Illinois didn't vote. And we do have a Consumer Protection Agency, but we have an election coming up here. And if the Senate changes hands, that won't be funded. And the people who have that will be worse off. What do you say to that dilemma?
Well, just one bit of good news about that. Even if the Senate changes hands, which I think is quite likely, the Consumer Financial Protection Protection Bureau is actually funded by the Federal Reserve, and that was by design precisely so that, we know that eventually the government is going to be under other hands. They don't have the ability to cut the funding to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Now that could change down the line with enough pressure, but in the short term, it's solid. I would say many things about this. One is that non-cooperation with debt needs to be paired with new forms of cooperation with each other. We need to produce public banks, the way that many other countries have public banks. The only state in the United States that has a public bank is North Dakota, and that's one of the reasons why they were the only state that didn't have a recession. They survived the Great Recession. I think we need an alternative credit reporting system, a different way to rate credit. Right now, like you said, if somebody doesn't pay their debt, a lender won't lend them money because the only factors that are being factored into play is how much money am I going to make if I lend somebody who's in a desperate position money. And the credit reporting agencies put a number on each one of us for how profitable we are to lenders. I think we need to create a different number. How socially responsible is this person? And in a true democracy, some debts really shouldn't be paid. We should actually reward people in a people's credit score if they refuse to cooperate with odious debt. One way to think about it is that the bank bailout was basically a creditor strike. It was all of the banks saying, we are going to refuse to lend any more money unless taxpayers give us $700 billion. And it was bank robbery, but the banks were robbing us. I would submit to you that the only way that we're ever going to make any progress on the political level is if we shift power back to the actual people, and something like a debt strike that has the ability to take the power away from those banks has a lot of potential to actually do that. We can bang our heads against the wall trying to get legislation passed, but the only legislation that's allowable is what the 1% will allow. If we stop cooperating with the 1%, we can retake our government. We can be the government ourselves. So I would say, my wife and I are currently paying our student debt. We have no other option. But we can afford to keep making those payments into an escrow account that could be used as a public bank to pay you, to lend money to you under socially just terms if you need a loan. So, well, see, in some cases we would say you shouldn't pay us back. In other cases we should say if you can afford to pay this back, it's socially responsible to do so. We would say that you should morally distinguish between different kinds of debt. We shouldn't treat every single debt as moral. For example, if you look at Detroit's bankruptcy, we would encourage a citizen's debt audit of municipal debt. Some of those debts that Detroit has really should be paid. The debts to pensioners should be paid. The debts to Wall Street should be refused. Right now, Kevin Orr is the emergency manager, someone nobody elected, and he is making all of the decisions as to which debts get paid and which don't. He's deciding that Detroit will default on many of its debt to pensioners in order to pay Wall Street. We would simply take the opposite approach. I don't know if that satisfies you or not, but the short answer is we should lend money to each other under different terms.
Yeah, question, and you made reference to North Dakota bank, but would it be possible, as an addition to what you're doing, going forward from a positive measure, to think about the creation of different kinds of banks? One we already have an existing network of credit unions, which in a sense are cooperatives of people who have accounts with them. Another possibility is something like the National Cooperative Bank in Hillsborough, Ohio, which only rents to cooperatives, but there might be the possibility of creating another kind of cooperative, and I think maybe this is what you're alluding to, a kind of credit cooperative where people who need credit can make contributions into an institution of their own creation, which would be something like the bank, or maybe something like the National Cooperative Bank that would lend to more than cooperatives, but the individuals as well. Another possibility are banks like, used to be called the Shore Bank in Chicago, which are branches in Detroit, which changed its name, but is basically a community development bank which is interested in developing local communities. Would there be some possibility of your mind of thinking and maybe potentially creating more institutions like this as fight-back institutions against Citibank and these other monsters?
Absolutely. Credit unions are fantastic, but the way that the laws are currently written, they're limited in how they can finance businesses, for example, or the largest amount of money that you could put into a credit union. So we would need to have some deep structural changes to allow some of what we want to happen to even be possible in the first place. But absolutely, what I'm envisioning is a people's credit score in which you could build credit in part by paying your rent, paying your utilities, things that the normal credit reporting agencies don't measure. And then we would be able to create an algorithm showing what your financial needs are and what your real needs are. And in the event that you don't have the means to meet your basic needs, that should really affect the credit score of your employer, not of you. If you look at Walmart, we've recently been contacted by the Walmart workers who are doing fantastic, innovative things with organizing workers. Walmart has their own credit card, and many Walmart employees are in debt on their Walmart credit card. Because in order to just get the basics, in order to put food on the table, they're not paid enough to keep a roof over their head, keep clothes on their body, put food on the table. They have to go into debt to do all of those things, and they're actually going into debt to Walmart. That should trash Walmart's credit score, not the employer, not the employee. And the real solution there is to fight for higher wages. Sorry. Did someone else have a question?
No, yeah, I have a question. I was wondering whether you would be able to make a much significant impact with the current paradigm and what you've done with the rolling jubilee way forward, as opposed to having a debt, a mass debt, a revolution or debt strike on a macro scale, which would be able to produce much tangible results or a greater impact, at least in the foreseeable future.
Are you asking whether or not it's possible to scale the rolling jubilee up?
Absolutely, and implement, for instance, the idea of a public bank system or a social credit responsibility based financial lending system, at least, for instance. Whether you'd be able to do that in the current paradigm.
Well, the way that we've set up the rolling jubilee, we made a promise to everybody who donated that we were going to use that money to purchase and abolish debt. So although there are a lot of other projects that we want to do, we feel like we should create them as an independent project and raise funds specifically for those purposes. That it'd be too much of a bait and switch to take the money that we raise for one purpose and start doing something else with it, even if those other things we want to do are really valuable, interesting things to do. There is a group in California, in the Bay Area, Strike That Bay Area, that is doing a lot of work about creating a public bank, and especially trying to create a check cashing and bill paying service for people who don't have bank accounts. This would be the foundation that you could build something like a public bank on top of. So we are working on it, but it's, these are big, big projects that take a lot of work to do. So we would really like your help if you could, why don't we work together to make it happen?
I had another question. Out of curiosity, I was wondering, how did you realize or uncover the secondary debt market, for instance?
So I first heard of it from David Graeber, who is an anthropologist who has been researching debt. He wrote a very fascinating book called Debt in the First 5,000 Years. And David is one of the people who helped get Occupy going in the very beginning. And so when Occupy started, I was talking to a lot of people about, what single direct action could we all take that really would stop cooperating with Wall Street. And we were thinking, how do we organize a debt strike? And it was starting to think along those lines that I talked to David, and he had heard it in turn from Michael White, who worked at Adbusters, who he was the first person to call for an occupation of Wall Street. And so that's how I heard about it. I mean, it's out there, it's in the world. It's been legal to purchase and to purchase debt as a commodity since the 1980s. It's just something most of us had never heard about. I vaguely understood that the financial crisis was caused by investors buying and selling mortgages that had been packaged. But I had no idea that this was going on with things like payday loans. So, yeah, I just heard from it from other activists.
So I find it interesting that you talk about kind of debt that's morally responsible to pay back and debt that's not. And I think, if you're talking about starting a business or buying a house, there are things that you just can't do without taking on debt. So I have a question about the sources of debt that's morally responsible to pay back. Are there people out there who are doing, creditors who are doing the right thing with debt?
Good question. So we would say that you should not be forced into debt for your basic needs. If you're forced to take on debt to get an education or to just eat, that is odious debt. But we recognize that there are socially productive forms of credit. There are, if somebody is just taking a risk and starting a business, I think it's perfectly justifiable that they are going to need more money than they have. However, if we weren't forced to take on debt for our basic needs, most of us would have a lot more money that we could use to start businesses. Think about all of the people from like my parents' generation who graduated from university without debt or with a teensy tiny amount of debt, who then went on to start a business. How many students here who are graduating with $30,000 of debt or more can afford to take the same kind of risk and start a business? The odious debt is having ripple effects that make these socially productive forms of credit impossible. One place that you might be interested in looking into is this organization called the Working World Fund. They lend money to workers' cooperatives in a way that tries to be socially responsible. They recognize that not every business they invest in is going to succeed, so they do need to cover that risk somehow. But when the businesses they do invest in succeed, the workers own the businesses. They've been doing a lot of funding in South America and have just recently been making investments here in the United States. There is a cleaning service, a house cleaning service in New York City that is all owned by immigrant women. They don't work for anyone. They don't have a boss. They are their own boss. They're being financed by the working world, and they're getting paid significantly more than the average house cleaner who, most of the value they create is going to the business, not to themselves. You might be aware of the New Era Windows and Doors factory in Chicago that took over their factory when it was going to be moved to Iowa, and their jobs were going to be just eliminated because there were going to be new, cheaper labor in Iowa. Working World is funding the New Era factory, and all of the workers there own the factory. As it succeeds, we're going to see factory workers who are able to make a liberating income, not just a living income, but a truly liberating income, because they don't have a boss, they are their own boss. We would love to see this kind of system expand. There's an entire city in France called Mondragon, where all of the businesses in that city are workers' cooperatives. Now, we don't see workers' cooperatives as just some kind of magic thing that can solve all of the problems. There's still huge problems, but it's a really interesting model that a lot of us in StrikeNet are interested in seeing it work and interested in seeing it financed in interesting ways. Just briefly, everybody deserves housing. I don't need to live in a mansion, but in San Francisco, there's a new housing project specifically for employees who work in nonprofits, where they are removing the debt financing layer to the property, and they've been able to reduce rent by 60%. So, San Francisco has some of the highest housing costs out there, and just by removing the predatory financing, they're able to lower rent. So there are solutions, creative solutions out there for the times when you really do need to buy something that is just beyond what you can do at present.
Wouldn't this notion of no debt, no going into debt for your basic needs, ideally go hand in glove with the notion of a guaranteed annual income?
Yeah, guaranteed annual income is a really interesting, exciting idea. I'll be interested to see how, you might be aware that Switzerland is now experimenting with that. To me, the devil is all in the details. Some people who are really pushing for a guaranteed income do it as justification for cutting social services.